Well, the college football season is about to kick off. Games are about to be played. But on this episode of Mic Drop here, brought to you by the Believe Network and available everywhere you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn, etc., and also available throughout the Sports Now family of networks, I'm going to take a pause from discussing game action, from predicting outcomes of games and talking about depth charts and what coaches are saying about their team. Maybe some comments about what they're saying outside of their team and in the landscape of college football, because we're going to discuss conference realignment. So really what everyone else is talking about, even while teams are trying to gear up to play a season. Again, I'm Mike Asti, and this is Mic Drop. And I am going to be joined by someone who maybe my longtime listeners and viewers could be familiar with. I did talk to him before when he was covering Baylor to preview a Baylor game against West Virginia. And Shehan Jeyarajah, who is a national college football writer now with CBS, joins me. So thanks for jumping on the show. And I definitely appreciate you taking the time. And I know you got to be a busy man now as a national writer with CBS with everything going on around the national scope in college football here.
Yeah, it's been quite a couple of weeks. I thought that maybe I'd get a little bit of a summer break, but no such luck. And I'll tell you what, obviously happy to be here to talk about all things realignment, but looking forward to somebody having me on a show to talk some football soon.
Well, that's going to happen. I promise you I will have you on the show to talk some football. We talked football before. We definitely will talk football again. And I hear that for sure. I also, as you could imagine, also lost most of my summer because while I'm covering football and college football and really in the Pittsburgh region in general, covering the Mountaineers elicited Bob Huggins stealing my summer. So the 2023 summer was stolen by Bob Huggins, but now it is about football again here on Mic Drop. CBS Sports is Shehan Jeyarajah. As we're going to talk conference realignment, we'll get to football in the future. So first off, I'm going to kind of go here, and this is a direction that I think all of us are giving our takes on because it's a take-filled world, and this is a very polarizing topic to say the least. We even have athletic directors and presidents of universities going into new conferences and then saying publicly, I hate all of this. Like, I got to go, but I'm mad. So where do you stand on conference realignment as a whole? You've been covering the sport for a while. You've certainly been watching the sport for a while. This isn't new to the sport, as you know. People even obsessed with numbers of conferences. The Big Ten had 11 teams for a long time after Penn State joined. So even before the wave 10 plus years ago, that wasn't always just, correct off of branding. But now it's really become more of a drastic shift than really we've ever seen in this current wave that now could dissolve another conference, could have conferences that were just generally speaking about a region in 4 different time zones. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Or are you just forcing yourself to embrace it? Where are you?
No, I mean, I think that to me, it shows a fundamental misunderstanding of the sport by some of the people who run it, because this historically is a regional sport. This is a sport that's defined by local rivalries, by local ties. And I think that, the thing that I always say is that at its core, college football is a sport that's about being able to go to your neighbor and talk crap to them about the fact that your team beat their team.
Sure. 100%. Yeah.
And I think that there's sort of this thought or understanding that, well, if we just get the biggest brands together, well, people will want to watch that. Well, I mean, look, West Virginia fans aren't going to suddenly just decide to become, Ohio State fans because their team is left out, right? That's just not how the sport works. And I think that that fundamental misunderstanding is really tough for the sport. I think it's also probably not going to be as big of a winner as people at the television networks think it is.
Okay.
And I think for me too, I mean, again, like, I don't just want to use the idea of the athlete experience as sort of like just like a political statement, but like, you're going to be in a situation now where Oregon is going to have to travel 1,500 miles to get to their closest game against the current Big Ten member. And Like people are just like, well, we have planes. It's not that big a deal.
Right.
People who don't have to fly across time zones very often. So
yeah, it's a lag. It takes you a while to adjust. And we're talking about maybe these teams are going to have to travel for those games. Certainly when USC and UCLA play Rutgers, I would imagine if you're trying to schedule that, you would probably want your team to get there a day or 2 days in advance to get over the change of time zone and all of that for a 5+ hour trip just through the air and packing and everything that goes into that and settling in. But then you really can't do that because even though this is really a pro atmosphere now and kind of a second pro football league with the way it's been being handled, they still have to go to class, ideally. So if you're worrying about school at all, you can't do that probably because then you're taking them out the whole week. And there are rules that are still over you on what you can do there in terms of practicing, in terms of when you travel, in terms of what classes you're missing, even though the conferences are different than the NCAA. So it's incredibly confusing, but it's a mess in that regard. Yeah.
no doubt about it. And I think that the other part of it too is obviously the focus is going to be on football, but
Right.
think about volleyball, think about soccer, think about how early some of these
Sure.
teams are going to have to go out there. I mean, the reality is, I feel like the smartest situation and smartest solution that I've heard is essentially creating satellite campuses in other parts of the country so that USC can go for like 2 weeks and be
Yeah.
on the East Coast.
That'd be something because then you'd have students
Yeah.
maybe who live in the New York area thinking,
Right.
I'll get a degree from USC's satellite,
Right.
even if they don't play sports.
But then, of course, the issue is you're in this situation where you're barely even a student at USC
Yeah.
in the fall, right?
Right,
And so
right.
there's no good answers right now. And look, I think that we are in a situation right now in college sports where everybody is so afraid of being left behind that they're willing to compromise on anything.
100%.
And
100%.
I think that within 10 years, we might be looking back at this. And I want to make a distinction between, the SEC added 2 teams in Texas and Oklahoma that very much fit within their footprint. It's a long trip between
Yeah.
Florida and Oklahoma. I'm not going to pretend it's not, but they occupy a region of the country.
Still a region, yeah.
Right. The Big Ten does not. The Big Ten is really throwing this all to the wayside. And again, I think that it fundamentally misunderstands college sports. And I don't think it's going to end up being as big a winner as the Big Ten thinks. And I don't think it's a surprise that this all happened under a former NFL executive as commissioner, because this is an NFL model. And my case has always been that if you try to make this sport into the NFL, you're just creating a worse version of the NFL without the draw of college football.
Yeah. And then there's even the idea that obviously the NFL and college football have had a wink for so many years, which is why you have eligibility rules and things like that. The NFL has huge college football the same way Major League Baseball uses their minor league system. Let's be real. That's what's basically happening. It's a minor league feeder to the NFL. But if you make this too much like the NFL, and not to say you aren't already for ratings, but you're arguably now competing league to league. And obviously the players are still going to want to get to the NFL, but there already are players that have flat out said, I mean, Devin Carter told us the other day that he literally decided to transfer for a 6th year of college and now go to West Virginia after being at North Carolina State because the NAL money that he could get is likely better than being a late round pick in the NFL. So he's forgoing the NFL to stay in college football longer. Like that's not something the NFL probably wants to be happening any longer. Once you can get in, they want you in there. So they're almost becoming accidental adversaries in a way. And again, that's even more of how this is a mess, but bringing up all the other sports that may matter to the school and certainly the student athletes. It doesn't matter to any of this in all reality. This is all about money. This is all driven by football. So even the schools that are really big time in basketball, like say a Kansas or a Duke, if they don't, it's really about what you bring to the table football wise, or Gonzaga. They don't even have football. Like, are they going to get in the Big 12 and be left out altogether, or what's going to happen there? That's all of a conversation that exists, but this is all about football. And then you also see programs hiring former NFL. I don't know if you noticed this around the country too. One of my cover did this. They're hiring former NFL GMs as their quote unquote GM of their program, which is a position that didn't even always exist. That also feels like now you're becoming an NFL team. But yeah, regionally, like where you live or even where I live, you have people, just bringing up Pittsburgh, for example, in kind of the eastern area, that area breeds Pitt, Penn State, and West Virginia fans all in that region. And that's 3 different conferences, and it's kind of maybe been better for media the last 10 years to have them in 3 different conferences. But if one of those fans went to one of those schools and has been a fan of one of those schools forever, they're not going to say, okay, for example, the ACC dissolved, Pitt screwed for a while, and now I'm going to root for the Mountaineers. They're not going to do it.
Right.
They're just going to complain and be upset. So,
right.
Yeah, that's where we are, though. You just don't know. Shehan Jeyarajah joining me here from CBS Sports. And I kind of then want to pivot into your predictions for the future a little bit, because obviously the Big Ten is a behemoth in terms of they're all over the country. They're becoming an NFL conference in a way. The number means nothing, and they're all over the place in terms of major brands, whether they're good or not right now. The SEC is really probably a bulletproof giant, even if they stay regionally. They're just never going away. That's where the main, probably most rabid group of college football fans around the country are, even though some other place in the country will be mad at me for saying that. But regionally speaking, that is college football, and it can expand a little bit, but who knows? Maybe they'll go out west, but that conference is fine. The Big 12 has now, I would think, surprisingly to most, stabilized itself, especially by adding Western teams and expanding the time zone, etc. That was a conference people thought would dissolve 6 months ago, but now has stabilized itself. The ACC is in a bit of a flux. The Pac-12 is now a Pac-4 that basically is not going to exist anymore. How do you think the landscape's going to look in the future in terms of, are we going to see 3 major conferences? Will the ACC stand? Are we going to have 3 major conferences that actually split into divisions that make it almost literally be the NFL, almost accidentally again, that they aren't even planning to do? What happens to teams that are in, say, the former Pac-12 that don't want to be a group of 5 team, but don't get invited or don't want to be in any of these major conferences? Are they literally like a soccer relegation? Are they suffering a relegation? What do you think the future looks like? Because all of those things are in play.
It's a lot to think about and a lot to talk about, of course. So, let's start, I think, with those remaining Pac-12 schools. So obviously there are 4 left. Stanford and Cal at this moment are trying to convince the ACC to potentially take them on.
Right.
I think that's ultimately going to be a fruitless effort that kind of is consistent with reports that came out on Wednesday night. The reality is, right, from a financial perspective, there isn't a lot of quote unquote television value there. And that's unfortunately what drives this. When Oregon and Washington joined the Big Ten, what changed wasn't necessarily that the Big Ten decided that they wanted them. It's that Fox ended up giving out more money to pay for Oregon and Washington to come.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't happen for Stanford and Cal, which certainly I don't anticipate, I don't see a pathway to them being in the ACC. Now, there's been rumor that Stanford is looking at potentially going independent, which maybe that's a school where it makes some sense to be an independent. Because of the number of sports that they field, because of their unique place in the sport. I think that they'd be able to continue to field games. Certainly, you still expect non-conference matchups against USC and Michigan and some of these really good schools that they've played for a long time. And so maybe
Notre Dame would work with them.
If
Notre Dame stays independent,
absolutely.
they probably would almost. I would imagine if they did do that, the presidents of those schools would probably work together and you'd have the 2 like that. They maybe could. Cal, though.
Yeah, Cal's in a very unique situation because I think Oregon State and Washington State is just going to end up with them combining with some amount of the Mountain West. And so, Washington State athletic director Pat Chun spoke yesterday and essentially said, look, we understand what we're up against. We understand what might happen. We plan on investing like a Power 5 team regardless. Now, obviously, we'll see. Again, there's not a ton of money in Eastern Washington.
Yeah, less is coming in. How are you going to invest the same?
but I do think that they understand the consequences of not being a major athletic department. I mean, this is a school that obviously their athletic department has been a huge draw, not just in terms of donations, but in terms of students, of bringing people to Eastern Washington. And I think that long term, they view themselves as a place that needs to continue to have competitive athletics to continue to retain students. And so, and really, these are the kinds of schools too, with Oregon State and Washington State, that are probably, I mean, I want to almost say most at risk, not just as athletic departments, but as universities, because we are reaching an enrollment cliff in the next couple of years. And the major universities are going to be all right? Like West Virginia, Pittsburgh, they're not going anywhere. But some of these more regional ag schools, like it's going to be a legitimate question if they're able to maintain their enrollments and finances and all of this over the next 5 to 10 years. So, so I think that these two end up, I think Oregon State and Washington State end up joining the Mountain West, continuing to invest at a high level and hoping that they can compete for, whether it's 5 or 6 auto bids in the college football playoff, try to compete for one of those playoff spots potentially. Cal is a unique one because they obviously, like you said, probably can't go independent, probably can't afford to go independent. No. They kind of would take any, I think, Power 5 share that was available to them if they were able to do it.
And the program's really, in terms of the national landscape, been non-existent for 2 decades. I mean, yeah, there are bad teams that can be still very attractive, like Colorado goes from 1-11. You hire Dion, and obviously the Big 12 immediately wants you with the Denver market and a fancy coach. But that's not the case with Cal. And outside of the play that's going to be put on highlight reels forever, it's like all casual fans probably know of Cal.
Right. And this is a big part of it too, is that this athletic department is in debt. They don't invest at a high level. I mean, this is total speculation on my part, but if they were in a really brutal situation, is it a conversation to stop playing football, right? Like, is that a conversation? I think that there are people on campus who would support that. I don't think that's happening anytime soon, but, over the next 10 to 15 years, maybe that's a conversation that happens. And the other part of it, too, is that culturally, I think that they would not be very happy in the Mountain West. I mean, this is a school, for people who don't know, I mean, UC Berkeley, which is Cal, is one of the top public institutions in the entire country.
Yeah, school-wise, 100%.
School-wise, it is
100%.
And it's the flagship, even more than UCLA is, of that UC system. Yeah. And I'll tell you what, when you look at the Mountain West, there's a lot of CSU system schools in there, Cal State system schools like Fresno State, like San Diego State, and there's just less prestige in the state with those academic institutions than there are with the UC system. So does Cal want to ally itself? And look, I think we can all look back 5 to 10 years and say if the Pac-12 was a little less pretentious, maybe they wouldn't be in this situation.
Oh, you 100% could argue, as I said earlier in the open, I would think most people who were betting men and women would have put money down because there was a flat-out battle between the Pac-12 and the Big 12. Once you had Oklahoma and Texas go the SEC and USC and UCLA go the Big 10, it was the two of them against each other. And the Big 12 was transitioning commissioners to a guy that wasn't involved in sports, was basically friends with Jay-Z and Brooklyn Nets, but not football. And then the Pac-12 thought, we're stable, we have the history, maybe we're better off in terms of the area in the country and schools, etc. And no. I mean, Brett Yormark, again, as a guy who covers the Big 12, tip of the cap to him. I think one of the most surprising developments is a big victory on his part, defeating the Pac-12, really, a victory for the Big 12. And this could easily be the reverse where the Big 12 was in this situation.
Absolutely.
But it's not. And unfortunately, the Pac-12 for those fans in this situation. And I'm sure they don't want this, but what you're describing is probably why Cal and Stanford, if they don't go independent, are willing to bend and do whatever they have to get in the ACC, because despite the regional name of Atlantic Coast Conference would be asinine, they would fit in as schools. And there are schools there, like, say, Wake Forest, that the ACC will protect forever, despite maybe giving you a competitive season in sports once every 15 years. They do care about academics there more than maybe any other conference. those schools, if they get there, might be protected, but getting there is probably a tough road.
No, and I think that this is one of the reasons that you see Notre Dame really pushing for Stanford and Cal to join
And they
the
are
conference.
doing that, yes.
Right, because I think that there are people, and I believe that Jack Swarbrick actually just spoke to ESPN about this, Notre Dame's athletic director, and said, we don't want two of the best schools, like in terms of academics, that play football at this level to be left out.
Yeah.
Because it does send a message. And we have reached a point. And by the way, you mentioned obviously the ACC. I mean, the Big Ten is the academic conference.
That's true. 100%.
Yeah, that's what they fancy themselves. And so there was talk whenever the Pac-12 was breaking up that, well, of course they'd want to ally themselves with Stanford and with Cal. But the reality is, when push comes to shove, even for that conference that talks big game, it's not about what a school can do academically. It's not about what a school can do to fit the conference. I mean, look, the Big Ten back in 2011 added Nebraska. Nebraska's not a bad school by any means, but it's not comparable to some of those schools that are obviously at the top of the Big Ten. They stick out like a sore thumb from a rating and ranking perspective.
Yeah, and you have hypocrisy of everybody though, because the ACC did the same thing, if you recall, which is how West Virginia got to the Big 12. The ACC, Big 10 didn't want them because it was a media market thing, an academics thing, and if you have Pitt, you don't need West Virginia because it's similar media coverage and then academics being lower. And then all of a sudden, it was a battle between West Virginia and Louisville to get in the Big 12. West Virginia ended up being accepted because they were coming off a run of being an elite program, and then the ACC immediately bends their academic requirements to get Louisville in there because Louisville's academics in terms of rankings is lower than everybody else in conference, and they no longer can say we're everyone's top 80. Now they got to move it to a top 100 just to get Louisville in, which fit sports-wise, but a conference that at the time said they would never bend academics, which is why they left WVU out, bent it for another school. So hypocrisy exists all over the place in conference realignment, more now than even ever before.
Right. And I think that, so to move over, obviously we talked a little bit about the Pac-12 schools. We're going to see how this gamble with the Big Ten and SEC works out over the next little while. And I do think that you almost have a test study in some ways of, we have one major regional conference and then we have one NFLized kind of Big Ten.
Right.
And I think that, look, people are going to continue to watch Big Ten games. Obviously, they're big brands. They're important. People watch these games right now.
Sure.
But I do think that over the next 5 to 10 years, again, it's going to be a test case. Do Washington fans care as much when they're playing Minnesota? Do UCLA fans, which already had their own struggles showing up, do they care when they're playing Rutgers? Is this going to be an existential issue that maybe ends up splintering the conference? And the other part of it, too, is that Oregon and Washington, for the next 6 or 7 years, are only going to be receiving half shares.
Well, I was going to get to all of that in a moment, in terms of the shares, because there's even rumors that SMU, which I think fans are really confused by this. Yeah. There are rumors that SMU is saying, please take me. I don't want any money for 7 years. Like that is just like mind blowing, because this is all about money. So I do want to get there in a moment here. Talking with Shehan Jeyarajah of CBS Sports, all about conference realignment. We'll get him on to talk about football someday, but obviously he's very, very involved in the conference realignment discussion here on Mic Drop on Believe in the Sports Now family of networks. Going to maybe the future of these conferences again. I think another attractive quality of the West expansion is the time zone factor. The Big 12 and the Big 10 in particular are trying to have a game from 10 a.m. on the West Coast all the way till 2 in the morning. Really, they want to be able to say you're watching one of our conference teams. But I'll ask you kind of what you're talking about. Do you think that will matter as much as they think it will? Because that may include a game in which somebody's watching that, yes, this is a Big 10 game or this is a Big 12 game. I can't avoid it. They're on every freaking time zone. But this is two bad teams playing that are not necessarily playoff contending teams, because now your conference goes from now 16, someday maybe 20. You're going to have bad teams in there. do I want to keep watching this? Like, are the ratings for this going to be good, even though it's my conference game? So now the average overall rating wise for your conference, when they put out the numbers of the ratings for any SEC game versus Big Ten, if you're doing it fairly, it might actually be bad or worse on an average, because now you just got so many teams, you're bound to land on some unattractive games that people are going to turn off.
Well, one thing that I'd point to is obviously, so the Big Ten is a Fox conference. The Big 12 is an ESPN and Fox conference.
Right.
And so one thing that I'd point to is that ESPN's late game has usually been like a destination, right? It's a place that they're looking to fill that inventory every single week. And so I think with the Big Ten, it was less about trying to get into that fourth window, because that's not as much a Fox priority as much as it was, let's get the best teams possible. They got 4 brand name teams from the West Coast.
I mean, the NBC factor could be part of that too, though, because like, for example, the Big Ten's going to have a kickoff with a Big Ten team in Penn State versus West Virginia. You're going to have Big Ten versus Big 12 on NBC. So they are doing a Big Ten showcase. Sure.
But, I think that I think that for the Big 12 specifically, the 4 time zone thing is a response specifically to things that they were told by ESPN. That we think that, for example, with the Pac-12, one of our values with the Pac-12 is that we can fill inventory in that fourth window on ESPN, on ESPN2, on ESPNU. Yeah. And so I think that the Big 12 view that as, well, if we are able to get into that time slot, we can kind of box the Pac-12 out. And so one thing that I'll say is that, last year, Baylor played their first ever 10:30 Eastern time game. They played BYU, who obviously now is going to be a conference opponent. Right. And that was the highest rated ESPN fourth time window game since 2016. Yeah. And so I think that the thing is,
and we're not even talking about, big time teams based on last year either. Obviously BYU was good. Baylor was so, but still.
Yeah. And so, but I think that the thing is, right, like they played a competitive football game, and they both were teams that were looking at, maybe we could be top 25, maybe we could be in that range. And I think that the Big 12, just when you look at their matchups, they're going to have, even when you include maybe these 4 new schools coming in, they're going to have more borderline or top 25 teams year over year than what the Pac-12 was able to have over the last couple of years. And so you're not putting your marquee teams on that late window, but I think that, do you put, again, I think that BYU is going to be in that window a lot. I think that Utah, who's a really good team, is going to be in that window a lot.
I think Utah would 100%. Yeah.
And I think that that's a
very underrated program the last 20 years. So they're going to arguably get more of a showcase than they ever were before, and maybe not be as underrated. This actually could benefit them. No, any of the programs.
I think so too. And, so many of those games, right, over the past couple of years, I flip on the TV and it's Arizona State, and it's it's Washington State, it's Cal. Yeah. Those are the kind of the games that are put in that window. I think that the Big 12 inventory wise, because you look 1 through 16 in
watching Utah or watching Oregon State, like what are you going to watch?
Right.
And people, when you're watching a game that late at night, when you're on the couch and you're barely awake, and you want to just watch college football all day, it's not like people have allegiances to a freaking network. They're going to flip through, and what game is better for me to watch if I don't care about these teams? They're not going to see, I gotta watch the Pac-12 game, or I gotta watch the Big 12 game, or I gotta watch ESPN versus Fox. They just want to watch the better game.
And I think that again, when you look at the Big 12, and let's just talk about the Big 12 for 1 second. I mean, so I think that when I look at this Big 12, obviously 16 teams now, personally, I see 0 teams that have a possibility of winning a national championship in this new era, right? Okay. But
even off of last year with TCU getting in the playoff despite not winning the conference, because that'll be the argument Brett, I'm sure, would tell you.
Absolutely,
we just had an example of a playoff team,
and I want every Big 12 fan to feel like if things like I totally get that. I just think that we're reaching a stratification right now in the sport where I put out a list. I think only 11 teams in the country right now, like existentially, can win a national championship, because
could be, maybe even less, honestly. I mean, it's been less at times,
right? And again, I'd love to be proven wrong. I mean, nobody would love more than me to be proven wrong. That's just kind of where I'm at with the sport. But I think that the Big 12 won. has decided we're going to be the best of the rest. We're going to have everything and everyone that you care about that's not in these big two conferences. We're going to do it right. We're going to be entertaining. We're going to create a great product. And the other part of it too is when you look at these 16 teams. So actually, let's first talk about the 14 this upcoming year.
Sure.
I mean, I picked West Virginia to finish last in the conference, and they are not a bad team, right? Like,
okay.
You're talking about 1 through 14. Every team in that top 14 is top half in preseason SP plus, right? Like every team in this conference has a pathway to a bowl. Every team in this conference expects to be competitive. And you're adding 4 new teams. Obviously, Utah is going to be one that vaults to the top of the conference. I think Colorado and the Arizona schools might take a little longer, but you're talking about somewhere between 10 and 14 schools every single year that thinks that they should make at least a bowl game, if not more.
And you also have most people, I'm a Big 12 voter too, that pick Texas to win the conference this year, and they're obviously departing for the SEC. So the top dog that maybe could make the playoff this year, will the Big 12 even sell that in the future? Because that team could no longer be in the conference.
Right.
Granted,
and
Texas has disappointed in the past, so they could
not
get it done.
But I think that it makes the Big 12 as wide open a conference as there is in college athletics, as 100%. Competitive a conference as there is in college athletics. Out of the sort of major conferences right now, I think it's by far the most upwardly mobile conference in college athletics. And obviously that doesn't even get into basketball, where I think that they are on such a level that it's impossible to leave the Big 12 behind because they have too many good basketball programs.
Yeah, that's true. And you could even make an argument, because there is conversation about bringing Gonzaga in as a basketball only school. I could actually argue, while obviously that would be great for time zone, for branding, I get why doing that as long as your football's stable otherwise. You could argue you actually would make making it too tough. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like, there are teams that are getting in the tournament. West Virginia, for example, was able to get in the tournament with less than 20 wins, which has always been a bar throughout history. But it's because I mean, every game is against a ranked team. And I think there's something to be said. Maybe you do want this, but eventually you may have the non-blue blood programs revolting back a little bit by saying, I cannot have every game on the schedule, especially basketball wise, be against a ranked team. How can we ascend? So it's a catch-22 in a way that might make it actually too tough.
Well, and I think that's actually one, whether it was a perfect,
unless you argue it kills Gonzaga. Because that is the other argument that it could kill Gonzaga basketball.
No, so I think that whether it was on purpose or not, I mean, I think that adding at this moment 3 football programs and also 3 basketball programs, I'd switch Arizona for one and Utah for the other, that are maybe not as competitive right now, that are okay programs, that are maybe below average programs, that actually might be a boon for the remainder of the Big 12. That maybe there are some wins on the table now. Maybe there are opportunities. UCF basketball, right? They've been a little better over the past couple of years, but like, that's a team West Virginia should beat. And I think that having, I mean, again, obviously you don't want to take in programs to be underdogs. And also the other part of it too is like, Colorado's had great basketball teams over the years, right? I mean, Spencer Dinwiddie, all those sort of, they've had good teams. Arizona State's had some pretty good teams. Obviously Arizona's going to be a killer, but I think that, again, it allows movement. It allows competitiveness. It allows you to build up wins. It means that when a team has a bad year, like, it might just be a bad year and you can rebuild and be back close to the top of the conference.
It could be important that, obviously, again, as we repeat, this is all about football. So when they're making these discussions, yes, Arizona being a great basketball program is great, and having a Hall of Fame coach in the past is great, but this is all about football.
Yes.
But there could be something to be said when you're talking about the entire calendar year and TV market-wise and future deals. If Brett Yormark goes into a room and says, I'll give you 3rd best conference in football, number 1 by a mile in basketball, the Big Ten very top-heavy in basketball, the SEC pretty top-heavy, and certainly Kentucky's been down in recent years. If they don't pick it up, top-heavy in basketball, we're top to bottom across the board in basketball, elite of the elite, and then really competitive with already a playoff team and ranked teams in football. there might not be right now a conference that can compete in terms of worrying about both football and basketball together. And maybe from a TV market perspective, they actually might have the Big 12 higher on the pecking order overall because of basketball, even though it's, again, all about football. But you would need to have the SEC disparity of football and the Big 10 disparity of football be a little bit bigger than it is now to make basketball fully irrelevant, because the Big 12 just crushing them in basketball in terms of depth of conference.
Yeah, and one thing that we've heard from Brett Yormark is actually that when he gets to the next round of television rights, one thing he's exploring is the idea of packaging Big 12 basketball rights separately and selling them separately from football. And, look, would it be a monumental change? Not necessarily, but could you squeeze $5 million more per school out of it? Could you squeeze $8 million per school out of it? Perhaps, and so I think
he has the basketball pedigree with, again, the Brooklyn Nets. They're actually, my colleague at WV Sports Now, he actually has a whole prediction that he feels the next decade the Big 12 could expand more out east, which would then actually favor some schools to stay in there, like West Virginia, that is kind of bad geography-wise, and then in the future, the Big 12 tournament being played at the Barclays Center. That's his projection, which would be crazy for the current West expansion. Obviously, if you talk to I guarantee you, I would, if that press conference exists and that announcement is made, immediately I am requesting an interview with the president AD of Arizona State, because they already don't want to come east. And if they got to go to east just for a tournament, they are going to flip a chair. So, but that wouldn't be a shocker when you have Brett Yormark involved, who seriously seems pretty dug in and kind of, it almost seems like he's having fun if you talk to him. It's like, I'm liking the boardroom meetings that I'm winning right now. We'll see where it is. But is that something you think could come to, not even just the Big 12, but right now it's all about West expansion, like it was in sports? Because I have a co-host on another show that brought up how this is, if you want to go to history, you can kind of connect to the dots of the Brooklyn Dodgers moving to LA and how controversial that was. And now here we are now with Major League Baseball over the country. Could it be that we have a West expansion now, and then these conferences go to an East expansion, and then you're more all over the map? And that might be when the SEC would have to react, because there's already rumors that pretty much Clemson could probably jump at any moment and they would probably be okay with it. Florida State and Miami are rumored for either the SEC or the Big 10. Florida State's kind of put it out there with some donors talking that it's not when, but it's not if, but when, like they want out now. So could that situation trigger the SEC? Because you're talking about whether the SEC could stay regionalized versus the NFL model. If these conferences would add any more and have it be East and West and the middle, would the SEC have to then call, say, even if they're still Southern, but would that then move the needle to say, we, Big 10, you can't have Florida State, we now need you, like we got to do something? Because they haven't really reacted since Oklahoma and Texas. So I guess the better question is, what do you think would trigger the SEC to react and say, we're the top dog, win all the national titles, we have the most fans, but now we got to move because Brett Yormark and company are doing more?
So I really don't know that there's anything that anybody can do that can force the SEC to move, because when you look at these 16 teams, I mean, they've won 14 of the last 18 national championships.
Yeah, they have.
And right. So I do think that
a lot of them by one school, and it's a clump of two or three.
Of course.
Correct,
but
actually, yes.
But it is right. Like, I mean, obviously Alabama's won 7 of them, but Florida won 2, Georgia won 2,
LSU,
right? LSU
back.
Texas won 1 back in 2005. Like, it's real. It's real. They have a lot of programs, and Auburn obviously won 1 in 2010.
Is that Texas one counting? Are they putting that on paper now?
That's SEC legend Vince Young. Come on,
right.
But I do think that. So I don't think that there's anything that they have to do. Okay. I mean, do they need a second school in Florida? I don't know. Do they care about Florida State? I mean, I think that they'd certainly have to consider it. I mean, this is one of the great programs.
What if the Big Ten, hypothetically speaking here, again, speaking with Shehan Jeyarajah, CBS Sports, mic drop on Believe in the Sports Now family of networks. What if the Big Ten, because this could be a quicker domino to fall. What if in the next couple of years the Big Ten adds Miami? Would then the SEC say, now we're calling Florida State? Or what if the Big Ten adds Florida State? Would they then call Miami? Or what if the Big Ten adds both Miami and Florida State together? Because there are rumors they could be a package deal. Would then the SEC call Clemson and say, I know you like the light schedule and walking in, we got to have you? Like, would any of that trigger that?
So it's a good question, and one that I think that they'd consider heavily. But would the Big Ten adding Florida State or the Big Ten adding Miami, would that make Florida into a Big Ten state, or would it be still a state that views itself as tied with the SEC?
Yeah, fan base wise, but TV market wise, they would probably argue, and they might get games on. I mean, it would go back to our other argument. They could sell it because they would have games on that are their Big Ten games, and the recruits may think maybe I'd actually prefer Big Ten football if I'm not taken by an SEC school. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think though that's part of the deal, right? Is that I think that would secure that second tier of recruit, absolutely. But like, Florida State would be playing at Minnesota. Florida State would be playing at USC. Whereas Florida, if you went to Florida or if you went to Georgia, would be playing Alabama right there, or would be playing South Carolina right there. And so,
if you're a true top dog, you're going to Bama or Georgia,
right?
Still,
so I think that it would certainly get them to sit and think. But I mean, again, I think that the one move that could be a semi-game changer would be if the Big Ten did convince Notre Dame to move. But
what about if the Big Ten convinces Notre Dame, and this might be harder, but this has been brought up too. What if Notre Dame, because they may stay independent forever and probably could get it done with the NBC deal, but what if they say, our ACC quasi connection of schedule and every other sport that we're in with the ACC, but independent in football, now we want to take that contract and shop it, and they bring it to the Big Ten. The Big Ten gets that, so they don't get Notre Dame as a member in football, but they get they get the Notre Dame schedule and get Notre Dame in basketball and volleyball, etc. Would that be good enough, or do they need them as a member?
No, I think that they would need them as a full member to really be able to pitch them as part of that television contract, but. I mean, and the other the other thing too is I don't even know if that would be enough to force the SEC to do something. I mean, again, they've got a 16-team conference right now with, relatively speaking, very little dead weight. I mean, they're
Vanderbilt is basically it.
Yeah, I mean, Vanderbilt is obviously a dead weight, but it's, again, that's obviously a historic team in that conference, and also I'm sure people are pretty happy to have that win on the schedule.
Yeah, they basically can help baseball, which the SEC cares about, and is still a top dog conference in baseball. They do want to be good everywhere else, and Vanderbilt can be a national contender.
And so I do think that I don't think that the SEC will be forced to move by anything. I do think that they could consider to move. I think that one that would be interesting is if they could get into North Carolina, or if they could get into Virginia, for example, to try
cough Clemson again.
Yeah. I mean,
Clemson's like a cultural fit and would be a little bit more north than they normally go. It'd be weird SEC, but it would still be south enough. I think that that would make arguably just as much sense as Oklahoma and Texas have been making. I mean,
I think Clemson makes a lot of sense. That I think that there's going to be pushback from South Carolina to get them in.
I'm sure.
But I think that the question is, right, if you can make North Carolina into an SEC state and get a brand like UNC. If you can get Virginia, add Virginia or Virginia Tech. I mean, these are two of these are the centers of ACC recruiting right now, is North Carolina and Virginia. So if you're able to annex those programs and really take those states, I think not only are you in a good position, I mean, obviously UNC is a blue blood basketball brand, still a really powerful football brand too.
Do you think UNC would, because they might be more attractive because they're a little bit better in football and have a bigger fan base overall than, say, Duke, their main rival. Do you think they would stay together? Like, could you envision a scenario that North Carolina would jump to the SEC and the SEC would say, Duke, you're nothing in football. I don't want you. We have the North Carolina market already. And then Duke is kind of screwed, even though they're Coach K and the historic basketball brand. Could that happen, or would North Carolina say, I want you to take Duke?
I think that absolutely could happen, because I think that, I think UNC is going to be in a position where, like we were talking about with the Big Ten, where everything's on the table and nothing is bigger than not being left behind.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think the other part of it too, though, is that Duke would continue to be a hyper elite basketball brand, and that's really where they make.
Maybe they could go independent, honestly.
No, I mean, I think that they have a lot of options from that perspective. So, and certainly you'd expect, obviously, that Duke UNC would continue to be played as a non-conference game in all sports. But
you would think so. You would think so. But we've lost a lot of other rivalries in years past, and even the ones that we've rebooted, it's hard to get them back on the schedule for the next 10 years. So
it's easier in basketball, at least, though, right? It's easier in basketball, and so I do think that. It's a bizarre situation. I mean, frankly, it's a situation that I hope that we're not in. But I think that for the SEC, they're only going to add if they feel like they have something to add. I don't think that they're in a position where they have to add at all to just be reactive to what something else is doing.
And that's the word, Jeyarajah here with CBS Sports on Mic Drop. That's interesting to me because in order to be successful in conference realignment from a commissioner all the way down to programs in the last 10, 15 years, you need to be proactive. The teams that have been reactive, say the Pac-12 now, are basically all screwed. But when it comes to the SEC, which is how dominant they've been for so long, especially in football, even a little bit in basketball as well, they don't have to be proactive and they can be reactive. That's what's different. It's almost like a different conversation with the SEC versus everybody else. That even the Big Ten, you got to be proactive. The SEC, as you're saying, kind of can be reactive and kind of still sit pretty because they basically had an NFL conference 10 years ago. Like it's almost like everyone's catching up to them. Is probably what they're trying to argue here. I want to ask you something that we talked about and glossed over a bit earlier that I think is confusing for fans because this is all about money. And this is all about saving your brand, saving your program. This is certainly driven by football. SMU, there have been documentaries about this. The program's kind of been screwed over throughout history for 40 years because what we have is NIL now. They were doing it 30 years ago, and they weren't the only school doing it. Even ask Eric Dickerson, but they got the death penalty because they did it horrendously and so kind of arrogantly. Got screwed out of a national title. They got a death penalty. They couldn't make a bowl game for 30 years. Couldn't get a recruit to go there. They're kind of finally in the last 5 or so years resurrecting themselves to respectability a little bit. And now that you have NIL, and now that you have the transfer portal, there's still a lot of money there. And the money is going kind of TCU in Fort Worth, which has certainly helped that program get in the playoff. But it could easily go to SMU. And there's a lot of big money donors, alums, Eric Dickerson again. They're trying to flood it, and they're trying to make that program back a little bit now legally. But if they get screwed conference realignment-wise, that could all kind of wash away, and it'd be hard to do that as a group of 5 because what are you getting coming in money-wise in comparison to the other programs? Is that why they're willing to say, anyone out there who's a major conference who's going to be in the automatic bids and you're going to be on TV deals, please take us. We don't even need the money because somehow our alum will fund us. Or is there another reason? Why would a program be willing to jump to a major conference, and a major conference that I think we would agree is probably number 4 now? Certainly it's 3 arguing at the Big 12, but I would say 4. The AC is not incredibly stable now in the future. Why would they want to be in a conference like that when it's not the Big Ten or the SEC with no money coming in for 5 to 7 years? It's not 1 or 2. That's a long journey with no money coming in and willing to take that payoff, just basically saying we'll be a vagabond, redheaded stepchild here. Why would they want to do that for you?
So a couple things. One, a big part of it is they've seen the costs of getting left out before. In 1996, of course, the Southwest Conference folded and the Big 12 was formed. And SMU was not a member of the Big 12. They got left out along with Rice, Houston, and TCU. And they have never truly recovered from that as a program until the last couple of years. And so the biggest thing is to try and secure their place in the future of college football. And they're willing to take a short-term hit in order to do that. Some context about SMU. SMU is in a neighborhood called University Park in Dallas, which is right next to Highland Park. They call it the Park Cities. And it is the single richest neighborhood in DFW, like single richest. And I believe also the richest neighborhood in Texas, actually. So it is it's money, right?
100%. Yeah.
And so people joke. I mean, so my sister actually went there. She was there on
Okay.
full scholarship, but she actually went there. And it's a great university, right? It's like top 50, 60 national university.
And 100%, it also would fit in with any conference that cares about
100%.
academics. Correct.
100%.
Yes.
Really well known for their business school, really well known for their law school. But the thing with with SMU and is that people joke, it's kind of Highland Park College. Like it's kind of like when you go to Highland Park High School, a lot of those kids go to SMU for college because it's right there in their neighborhood. It's a great national university. And then people stay in the area in DFW and continue to support the university.
Yeah, I mean, the area offers a lot.
Yes,
but
it offers a lot.
Yeah,
and that's one of the biggest pitches that they've made in recruiting for football players, for staff, for all of that. So all that to say, like, it's not just that they're in Dallas. They are specifically intertwined with money in Dallas and old money as well in Dallas, because Highland Park is really an old money community. So people are thinking it from the perspective of, well, 5 or 7 years, you'd be making $0 instead of $40 million. But keep in mind, their current television contract with the AAC only pays them about $7 million a year. So really, that's what they'd be costing themselves, is $7 to $8 million a year, not $40 to $50 million a year. And so the thing is, for them, they are a unique program. I don't think that there's maybe any other program in college athletics.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any other program that's endured as much over the last half century in any sport overall at all.
And the thing that I'll say too, right, is I mentioned old money. So SMU is also in a very interesting situation because there are people there who remember what it was like in the 80s, who remember what it was like with the Pony Express and competing for national championships and competing for conference championships and getting Eric Dickerson and all this sort of thing. And the question is, I mean, people don't realize the Dallas Cowboys came to Dallas in 1960. It wasn't that long ago. And they, in the 70s, they won a couple of championships, but SMU was a Dallas brand in the 80s. Well, then like the 90s happened. Obviously, SMU fell off and the Dallas Cowboys are the biggest football team in the world.
Right.
So is it something that they can replicate again? I don't necessarily know the answer to that.
Normally, unless like you're Miami, like the U,
Right.
and it's been down in recent years, obviously, but you could argue, and certainly Michael Irvin said this, that when they were in their heyday, the U was bigger than the Miami Dolphins, even though you have a history with the Miami Dolphins, the only undefeated team, etc.
Yes.
It's still hard unless you're that flamboyant and that much of a personality driven team and that charismatic like the U was. It's very hard for any program, like Pitt deals with this with the Steelers, to be in a pro market.
Right.
So SMU, even if they get back to where they were, now you can spend money legally and have NIL and get players, they would still be competing with the Cowboys in a pro market. And unlike the Dolphins, let's face it, who, if they're losing, they're not a darling as much as they were in past years. The Cowboys are always the tops of the Forbes list.
Well,
and it doesn't matter.
And I would make the argument that the only, and I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody, but I would make the argument that the only college program that can truly compete in the pro market is USC. And LA is not a historic, these teams are not historically as tied to LA.
They weren't even there at all until 3-4 years ago. And the Rams won a title, but even the Rams winning a title is not USC. Yeah.
Right. And so USC, I think, can compete. I think that USC, when they're good, I do think that there are aspects of it being a college sports market, but I look at, you mentioned Miami. I don't know if that's the case anymore. SMU, I don't know if that's the case anymore. I mean, I think that you can even, go. I mean, obviously Northwestern in Chicago. Nobody's watching Northwestern more than they're watching Chicago, right? So like, it's tough. I mean, maybe like Washington and the Seahawks a little bit, but like, it's tough. Is the point?
But you think it's a good plan because people are making fun of it, but like if you're SMU, you would agree to the $0 split if you can get rescued. That makes sense.
If I'm their athletic director, Rick Hart, I believe is his name, I think that that's a pitch worth making to try to secure your future in college football. The thing that I'd say is that I think it is a risk, and I think specifically the risk is that you join the ACC for $0, and then the ACC isn't a major conference at the end.
Right, because you're the top dogs are now in rumors of leaving, and who knows the next few years. And what I would maybe try as a pitch, I don't know if this would exist part of it or the ACC would agree. I would say I'll come in for $0, but my exit fee is then $0 or low. Like, I don't want to be in a situation where I'm getting $0 from you. Then I need to leave in 2 or 3 years. Even you may even want to kick me out, and then I got to pay you $300 million to leave.
Right.
Like, that would be insane.
And so I think the big thing is for SMU and for SMU boosters and for SMU fans is what they are looking for, because they're recruiting pretty well. Like, they're recruiting big time players. Their quarterback this past year was or who's this upcoming season is a kid who was a top 120 national recruit. And, so they're making things happen. But I think the final piece, and the piece that you can't buy, is relevance. They want to be a major college football team. And right now, you have to sell to whatever players that you're going to play in the AAC and not in a major conference. And oh, by the way, our coach just left to go to TCU because he thinks that you can recruit better and build something better there. And also Baylor's recruiting. Baylor's recruiting in the area. Also Texas and Oklahoma are recruiting in the area. Also Texas Tech is hitting DFW in a different kind of way with Joey McGuire. So,
and then more SEC schools with Oklahoma and Texas coming in. Alabama's going to say, I'm going to recruit 100%. Dallas now.
100%. Well, and they have. And Arkansas hired a Texas high school football coach to try to recruit that area better. Now, obviously, Chad Morris did not work, but it is a priority for them to recruit DFW. And so, all that to say, SMU has a lot to offer football recruits in terms of the quality of their school, the quality of their education, the experience they can have on campus. But the thing that they cannot buy is being a relevant football program and people showing up to their games. I went to an SMU game last year, and I've gone obviously to many over the years, but I went to specifically an SMU Navy game last year, which was a Friday game. And it was, I would say it was like a high school atmosphere, but my high school actually had a better atmosphere just because, because people were at the Highland Park game. People weren't at the SMU game.
Yeah. Did you go to high school in Texas then?
I did.
Yeah. So that might not be totally
no,
fair.
For
like
sure.
Texas high school football.
But that's what you're up against, right? And so it's and now obviously a big thing is SMU shouldn't be playing on Friday, and that's a whole other thing. But
there's a rumors the Big 12 wants to jump on Friday, and I know that especially in the region that I cover, that actually would annoy a lot of the programs because they really do care about high school football, and coaches want to go to those games and recruit those kids. They don't want to have to play.
It would not fly in Texas. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, that would be hard. I could see that being a problem.
And so all that to say though, right? Like the thing that they are most, I'd say, insecure about as a program is the fact that they don't have very many fans because they don't have a huge student base. They don't have a huge alumni base. They don't have a whole lot of casual Dallas fans because there's too many other teams to root for. And I think that their hope is, well, if we are a major college program that competes at a high level, well, then people will casually just come on out, right? Like people will be more open.
Like the 80s. I mean, that's what happened prior
100%.
to the death penalty. They basically were trying to recreate that again, and the death penalty is why they got killed fan base-wise.
They had the Dallas versions of Will Ferrell and Snoop Dogg being on the sidelines in the 80s, right? Yeah. And like that's really what you need to do. Now, I think that they've actually built some pretty good connections from that perspective. I mean, the mayor of Dallas actually is at like a lot of the games on the sidelines and stuff like they're trying to build that relationship. But there's a cap on it when you are not a major conference team. And I think that that's what they're seeing. And look, again, will it work? I don't know. Also, by the way, are you devaluing your own program by saying we're worth $0 to you right now?
Too. It looks bad because I think if you did this in the 90s before social media or even the early 2000s, sure. But like everything that you put out there as a sales pitch that doesn't even go through is going to get on social media. So like now you're trying to get casual fans that are going to look and say, if I'm not from the Dallas area, and I'm looking for a college team to support, maybe you're winning 8 games instead of 5, but like, there's not a rocking atmosphere and you're worth $0. Why am I jumping on? So
and so I do think that one thing is, like you said, it is all about money, but I think that I think it is not just for SMU, but for everybody. It's about relevance, because relevance brings you donations. Relevance does bring you money in terms of actual football. Relevance brings you students. Relevance brings you fans. And so the big thing with all of this is that I don't think that Oregon and Washington are sitting here being like, well, the real issue is that we need to. The money with the Pac-12 deal was a huge thing.
Yeah.
The bigger thing is that people can't flip on their TVs and watch them.
Yeah, I mean, the Apple streaming thing. Like,
Right.
yeah, I get on demand. I get the sales pitch of everyone's going streaming and cutting cords on cable. I don't even have cable. I have YouTube TV and those services too. But it's hard to not be available at all. Like,
and I think that
when everyone else is, like, still.
If the number was 25 million, but you were appearing on ESPN, I think that they would have signed the contract. Right. I don't think they would have broken up. It was the fact that they went through a period of irrelevance because of the Pac-12 network, which people could not get. And now everybody was far too afraid to take a deal that would put them in that position. Because I truly believe it. I don't think that the other 10 schools had any interest in breaking up. But
no, Arizona State clearly doesn't want to did not want to break up, even though they're coming to the Big 12.
Utah did not want to be there. I think that Oregon and Washington wanted to just feel secure in their future in college football, but I think that they would have much rather. I think if they could have gotten $30 million to stay in the Pac-12 and play on linear television, I think they would have done that.
Yeah, and Brett Yormark was able to position a TV deal for the Big 12 prior to having 30% of the conference teams right now signed the deal. So like that, the conference, the networks were taking a gamble. It really, I mean, it really looks like Brett Yormark went in a room and just dominated. Like without having, like he lost Oklahoma, Texas, lost the two big brands, had the four, but didn't have these other teams, didn't have the West expansion, had, fans of West Virginia, for example, wanting out of the conference. And he's in there saying, ESPN and Fox, I need you to sign the deal and give me more money. It's amazing that they didn't laugh at him, but no, they did, and then they beat the Pac-12 to the deal, and that it effectively killed the Pac-12, because you could argue if USC and UCLA stayed, but once they left, that canceled out Texas and Oklahoma, so they were on even playing field, and then the Big 12 has a better TV deal.
And so I think that the other part of this too is the Big 12. With the collapse of the Southwest Conference in 96, with realignment in 2010 and 2011, and then obviously with Texas and Oklahoma back in 2021, they've been here before. They've been not just struggling, but at risk of total collapse.
And losing marquee. They lost Nebraska. It's been down, but that was a marquee brand, and they brushed their shoulders off.
So I think that when they went into 2022 and 2023, I think they understood the potential consequences in just a fundamentally different way than the Pac-12.
Probably.
And
despite a new commissioner. I mean, obviously,
right. And I think that Brett Yormark understood that, look, their television contract is pretty good, right? They're going to be making close to $32 million a year in television revenue. They probably could have gotten more.
Yeah, certainly now. I think they could have gotten more.
But that's the thing. I think that Brett Yormark approached this from the explicit perspective of, we are going to go in and plan for our next television contract. We're not going to do this. We're going to have 6 years of pretty good money. We're going to make a little more than we did before.
We'll get the deal, even though it could be better with how we have the teams now. We'll worry about it later, because if we don't have the TV deal, we're not going to get these teams.
But now, outside of the Big Two, you could make the argument that the Big 12 has almost everybody else that you can care about.
Yeah, there are three. Yeah,
and so I think that they understood that the consequences of us not getting this done is literally that our conference could collapse.
Right.
And I think the Pac-12 went into it as, well, we got to push because we're chasing the SEC and the Big Ten. I don't think they thought the floor was as low as it was.
Right. And there it appears like there might have been some naivete as well, where they're saying we're the conference of champions. We got people bragging about us on national TV all the time. We got, the lineage, and I think maybe they also thought these programs were going to stick together more than they did, that maybe they would really worry about the brand of the Pac-12, but they're not.
No, and I do believe them. I do believe them when they said all of our programs are committed to one another. But the issue was when they got into a position, and actually Colorado Athletic Director Rick George, during the press conference where they announced this, basically said, we want to be allied with Fox and ESPN. And this was before the details of the Apple deal leaked out. But I think that was pretty telling, that they kind of went to the table and said, we cannot afford to be on streaming only. Now,
especially now, because after all of this, and this is an undertone maybe for some college football fans, but ESPN getting Penn away from Barstool, getting really now in the betting community, you could argue that separates ESPN from Fox even more than it was, even though Fox is still stable and they have the major contributors and talking heads. So those two are the net, even with streaming and no matter what's going on, those two are the networks that are going nowhere and going to thrive, whether it be TV, cable, streaming, because they're also on streaming. You can get those on YouTube TV. It's not like they're boxed out. So that was a major player that all these decisions people are making are then getting corroborated. Maybe they knew this was happening. Maybe they didn't. By now we feel even better about ESPN and going with them. It's ironic, though, if you're Colorado, and obviously the Big 12 just wants money, and Brett Yormark's not mad at them, but they literally left the Big 12 thinking it was going to collapse a decade ago, and now they're coming back in. It goes to show there's no brand unity. They're just chasing the money, which is smart. This is a business.
Yeah. Everybody, what's the Mike Tyson quote, right? It's everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
And that is the Mike Tyson quote. That's fantastic. Yes.
And I think that you see that. And I think, again, Colorado understood that better than almost anybody else in the Pac-12. That you know what? We are at risk. And when we're at risk, we are at true risk of that this could all fall apart and we could end up with no television contract and no conference, and be sitting in the situation that obviously the remaining four are right now. So,
and maybe part of why they hired Dion too. Not to say he can't coach, but that helped them hiring Dion, and who knows how long he'll be there. But even if Dion leaves in 2 years and say goes to Florida State, the media market, Colorado, there is history there. It'll be interesting. But I guess the argument of what you're saying, top heavy wise, the Big 12, like right now, when you go in the future, you take out Oklahoma and Texas, the historic brand with the most fans, the most success throughout history of the sport and been around the longest, are going to be West Virginia and Colorado. That's good if they're like the Robins to your Batman, probably. But when they're the they're the blue bloods of the future Big 12. That might be hard, but maybe it'll be fine if everyone's a ranked team and there's money and you're in good TV markets all over the country. But that'll be interesting. Like West Virginia has managed to be a blue blood when they have never liked the conference they've been in forever.
Yeah, and I think the big thing with the Dion hire, more than just the hire itself, was Colorado signaled to the country that we are absolutely serious, that we understand the implications of being bad at football, and that because it wasn't just that they hired Dion, it's that they paid him $5.5 million a year. It's that they gave him a big enough staff salary pool that he could hire a sitting head coach from the MAC as his offensive coordinator, that he could hire an Alabama assistant.
Yeah, think of that. Like most coaches, you'd rather be a head coach than an assistant, even if it's a lower level.
Totally. And which also, by the way, like Sean Lewis should maybe actually just be the head coach at Colorado. He deserves a lot better than I think that what he got at Kent State, but for what he accomplished there. But I do think that it was to be clear, I think that
he probably will be in 3 years. Dion probably already knows he's
maybe.
Like the way Dion works is, I would not be shocked if in his brain he's like, I'm going to do this in 3 years. I'm going to call Florida State and say, do you want me? If not, I'll get myself somewhere else, and then I'll give it to him. It's the same thing he did at Jackson State.
Sure. No, I think that's possible. So I think
literally what happened there.
So, and I want to be clear, I don't think that Deion Sanders had much to do with Colorado going to the Big 12, but I think that the process of his hiring was a signal to everybody else that we plan to be serious about this. We plan to invest. We're going to build new facilities. We're going to build. We're going to invest in our staff. We're going to recruit at a higher level, and we again understand. And I think this was a signal to their boosters and their alumni base.
They have no recruiting there. Like if they didn't have this NIL era, they would be screwed.
Yeah, well, and I think that for them historically, when you look back at some of their great teams from the 80s and 90s, it was going into Texas a lot. So I think that them being able to go back, Now they'll be able to go into Florida a little bit too with UCF, and obviously I think that the western part of the U.S. with Colorado, Arizona, Utah is kind of like a slowly building area too from a recruiting base.
Okay.
I mean, so I think that it makes a lot of sense. And again, look, the people have asked me, like, why do I criticize the Big Ten so much for geography when I don't criticize the Big 12? I mean, the reality is, obviously, Big 12 distances are far. They're still a lot less far than
most teams. Yeah, it's really only like West Virginia getting.
Well, and the thing is, right? So it's 1,600 miles from Washington to Nebraska, which is the closest existing school. Well, 12 of the other 15 schools are within 1,100 or 1,600 miles from Arizona State. Now, the three exceptions are UCF, West Virginia, and Cincinnati. Right. But West Virginia and
now they have each other. Like West Virginia was alone for a while. They do have each other.
UCF is kind of like the one true geographic outlier, I'd say. But like West Virginia is going to have Cincinnati. But also, again, I mean, it's a far trip. But
there were rumors, and this is why I thought UConn made sense. I know they were independent; they don't bring anything in football, but they would have saved that argument, and they obviously bring a basketball brand,
right? And so I think that again, the distances in the Big 12 will be significant. They're not going to be the 5.5-hour flights that we're talking about.
No, it's not UCLA
in the Big 10, right? So I do think, and I think the other thing too is that fundamentally, this is, you could almost call it a Middle America conference. Like, I do think that there is a lot of
culturally, I think it is kind of similar in the Big 12.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's. I'm not saying that people from Orlando and people from Morgantown and people from Salt Lake City are the same thing, because they're not. But I do think that there is like an ethos there that fits. I think that there's a reason why. I mean, there's a couple reasons, I think, but like, I don't think the Big 12 was like, we need to get into San Diego. I don't think San Diego fits what the Big 12 is.
Yeah, because that with Memphis was in rumors as well, and it kind of appeared like, it almost appears to me like Brett Yormark was dangling those teams out there. He, of course, said the rumors weren't true, but almost as bargaining chips to say, look, like if Arizona and Arizona State, if you want to play hardball and try to save the Pac-12, we can add other teams. And once we add other teams, we might not be coming back to you for a while. Like kind of, so that stuff could be going on. But yeah, and it does kind of suck. Then you have programs like San Diego State that ascended so much in basketball, that can't ascend in football, that does have a little bit of a history, that now is just like slap in the face, like you're done, potentially screwed. But yeah, we'll see. Shehan Jeyarajah here of CBS Sports. Before I get you out of here, and I could talk to you all day about this, we really could do a 3-hour show. I do want to ask you, maybe localize a little bit of teams that I cover, because the overlying theme of West Virginia fans in particular, and I'll start there, is I get stability, I get cultural fit, all of that, but like the fan base, probably 80% of them still, and it's not as high as it was before, it's probably 95% 2 weeks ago, but it's still probably 80%. One out of there. Like, they think that being in the Big 12 is the single reason why it's the darkest period in 40 plus years of the program's history. They think being there with travel has canceled out how well they've done recruiting, because they have top 40 classes, but then you got to spend money travel wise. The fan base does not care about a lot of the games. And now that Oklahoma is out, because they kind of wanted to beat them, and now that they did beat them, that's gone. They've been beating Texas oddly, but like they're going to be gone. I don't think anyone, West Virginia fans, going to get behind ever a West Virginia, Utah, West Virginia, BYU, West Virginia, Texas Tech rivalry like they have. And I've argued with fans that the program compromise has been, well, we'll stack the out-of-conference schedule with regional rivals and we'll be in the Big 12 for stability. Problem is, as we're talking about, the Big 12 now has got a playoff team. They lose the brand, but they have a lot of ranked teams, a lot of good teams. It's hard enough in conference play. And if you stack it out of conference with regional rivals, West Virginia on PFF has the third hardest schedule in the entire country. So you shouldn't be playing more Power 5 schools than everybody else. TCU didn't even do it last year. But then if you go into what Neil Brown even said yesterday when I spoke to him and asked him this, that his ideal schedule, a man who's playing 2 Power 5s out of conference, his ideal schedule is 1 Power 5, a Group of 5, and an FCS. Ren Baker said this. He's flat out said on my show and other shows that whenever the contracts are done, 1 Power 5, 1 FCS, 1 Group of 5 out of conference with 9 conference games, that's what he's doing. So he's going to screw this regional rivalry thing, but that means the fans are then going to be upset. So for you, as an outsider, do you think West Virginia now, with how things have shaken out, is better off staying and just basically dropping caring about multiple regional rivalries, maybe hang on to the Pitt game and drop the others? Or should they now call the ACC and say, hey, you know, it doesn't matter that we're the Pittsburgh media market and we carry this lower media market if we're local. You know, we got a lot of eyeballs and fans. Pitt probably now would want us because of what the revenue was with the brawl. We would rather be in the ACC, a conference that may not be stable and could dissolve.
Well, I think the tough part is right now there's not obvious interest from the ACC, right? That's
right.
Obviously
and before, and the Big Ten's not interested either. Right.
And so I do think that in an ideal world, West Virginia would be in the ACC. I do think that probably just does fit them better. I mean, well, obviously in a really ideal world, there'd still be a football Big East, but that's a whole other conversation.
Right.
Unfortunately, I just don't think that that's a world that's going to exist for them. And which I do think is unfortunate in a lot of ways.
If the ACC, I'll ask it this way then. What if the ACC called them and says, we'll bend and we'll take you? Would you, if you're AD West Virginia, then you would go still?
I would take that. Yeah, I would take that. I mean, I think
it's a risk though. Like, what if the ACC dissolves because then the Big 12 may not take you back?
It's absolutely a risk. I don't think necessarily that the Big 12 would take them back, but I think that again, it's very tough, right? It's very tough. Yeah. I do think that there's benefits in. Let me take a step back. So I would probably push back on the idea that the primary reason that West Virginia is struggling is because of the distance and the lack of rivalries. Sure. I think West Virginia is just struggling, frankly.
There's a bunch of reasons, 100%. But that's what the program has been selling, and Neil Brown even talked about the schedule yesterday.
Totally. I do think talking about West Virginia right now, I mean, it is so freaking hard what they're trying to do here, right? I mean, in non-conference this year, they're going to play Penn State, one of the best 5 teams in the entire country.
A playoff team. Basically.
And then they're going to play Pitt, who's won 18 games over the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And then they're going to get into a Big 12 where, again, I picked them last. And we can have, that's a different conversation. But, like, I
cover them. I'll tell you, I picked them second to last.
Yeah. And so, like, again, I think that there's absolutely a pathway for them to not finish last. I don't know if there's a pathway to them finish much higher than like 11th, right? It's a really tough,
and they got to get a bowl to save Neil Brown's job, probably.
Right? And so, and by the way, they could start 1-5, and it might just be over. And so, all that to say, I mean, I think that it is. I understand, and I mean, look,
and you could argue the last 5 years because a fan actually replied to me with like math of this.
Yeah,
if you would have done Ren Baker's schedule 5 years ago during the whole Neil Brown era, that would, and it wouldn't be elite, it wouldn't be Rich Rod. But you could argue it would be bowl game every year at minimum, and it would be another win a season, probably, even though they did beat Virginia Tech. Figuring maybe you even lose one of the Group of 5 games because, for example, Pitt's lost the Group of 5 games, so West Virginia could. But for the most part, you'd add another win to the schedule. And last year, 5 and 7, one you take Pitt off because you have 2 Power 5s, and you throw a Group of 5 in that's kind of lowly. You're a bowl team then. That's different. It's a lot of money coming in. That's just a different life than 5 and 7.
And I think that's sort of the question is, if you're a West Virginia fan right now. I mean, obviously, you need to play one of your regional rivals, right? Like, you have to play at least one meaningful regional rivalry game a year, whether it's Pitt, whether it's Virginia Tech, whether it's Penn State, whoever. Yeah. But I mean, I'd love for it to be Pitt every year, but that's a whole other conversation.
It seems like the program wants it to be Pitt every year, but then it would scrap the others. And I do think like they've won the Black Diamond Trophy a couple times.
Sure.
They did play Maryland recently. Problem is, with everything we're talking about, they started, I don't know how they got screwed in all these contracts, but they 3 years in a row on the road against the Power 5 week 1.
Yeah.
Like West Virginia's 15th winningest program all time. They should not be doing that. I don't know. I mean,
And so all that to say, like, I think that you have to ask yourself, is it more important to play multiple regional rivals a year, or is it more important for your football coach to be able to win games, right? Because like, I think at the end of the day, it's really cool that last year that they played Pitt and Virginia Tech. Also, I think that
both
people
on
probably
ESPN,
would have been but also I think people would have probably been happier if they were 6 and 6 instead of 5 and 7.
100%, I think they would.
And I think this is a different conversation. And so I do think that I mean, Ren Baker is an incredibly smart guy. I got to work with him during his time at North Texas a little bit.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, I thought that would make sense down in Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's a home run hire as AD. And he's had, as you know,
tremendous.
just from the outside, he's had to deal with
so
more
much.
than he ever would have imagined
right.
taking the job. But I even think culturally he kind of fits in there. I think his family likes it. I think he actually... he's going to be attractive to other programs. Like Ohio State already has a job open. If he was 3 years into this job, he might be attractive to them. And Heather Lyke at Pitt, for example, could be a candidate at Ohio State. I think there's a chance that if the program gets good again in multiple sports, that Ren Baker may actually field a call in 3 years and say, I'm not leaving. Like, he likes it. I do believe he really likes it there.
I got a chance to talk. I got a chance actually to talk to him at Big 12 Media Days. And he said, you know, look, I knew that this was going to be a good fit, but I'm really relieved that I think that his family has done much better there than he he worried. And so I think he's very happy there. I think he's very happy at West Virginia. I think he's a tremendous athletic director. And so, you know, all this to say, I mean, I think that he understands that at the end of the day, we're sitting here on August 10th. We're not talking about the fact that West Virginia got to play 2 regional rivals. We're talking about the fact that they went 5-7 last year. And I think that long term, that's a more significant benchmark for them, that they have to just win games.
You have
And so I think
you have the head coach. He was asked I'll explain. Like, he was asked a question of this is how one of my colleagues phrased it. Neil, you've been presiding over this era that has brought about all these regional rivalries. What does that mean to you? Neil literally responded by saying, it's really cool, but wait, I hate the schedule. So like, he's not giving even the reporter what he wanted. He wanted to write a big story on how new regional rivals are cool. And Neil was like, no, this is really not that cool because I have to lose a lot of these. Like this, you know, it only goes so far.
And I mean, I think a great thing too would be to try to figure out some more regional teams that are group of fives, right? Like to play a JMU or something like that. I don't know the politics between the Marshall rivalry.
I was gonna say, like, that's another thing people have brought up. Like, if you want to play a group of 5, just add another rival and have it be Marshall. They're gonna be a group of 5, but like that does get into a lot of politics. And they want to host the freaking game in Morgantown, or in Huntington, which would mean a lot less money, and like you're not gonna. Like, who, you know,
you little bit organize absurd. A 2-for-1 though, right? Like there's ways to do it if you want to do it, right? But if they don't want to do it, it's also like fine. But I do think
I don't think the VU wants to do it, to be honest. With you.
And you know, but all that to say, right? Like there are other programs in Virginia, in North Carolina, obviously in West Virginia, in the surrounding area, in Pennsylvania, that are group of 5 that you should be able to beat, that are still relevant to you. Maybe you could find programs that you have some level of history with. And so,
or freaking play SMU that we talked about earlier. Like right now, they're not a major program. They're in a similar recruiting base that you're competing with against conference teams. You may lose, you know, you should still win 3 out of 4 of them. Right now, 2 out of 4 at least. And but when you beat them, it'll be okay. It's literally who TCU, you know, played last year and they got in the playoff.
No, and that's actually you know, TC is a good example. Again, I've talked to their athletic administration a lot. They very much that's how they structure their schedules. That's how most programs structure their schedules.
I know, freaking Shane Lyons. I know, like, and now everybody's going to play Alabama in the future, and he's going to be on the Bama sideline. Like, he just capitulated to fans and wanted to bring back the regional rivalries for ratings and fun and interest in national TV. It doesn't appear to have been a good idea.
That's something that you can do too, because I imagine that these games were scheduled 2016, 2017, 2018, right?
Even before some, they're coming off the Geno Smith era.
Totally. Right. And so like you think that you are something that you're not anymore. And I mean, look, obviously, you know, I don't want to relitigate the whole Dana Holgorsen era, right? But like, I do think that people would feel differently about these games if Dana kind of had his thing going right now, as opposed to what's happened the past couple of years.
I think there are even some West Virginia fans that would agree now, but they should if they don't. That, as you know, Dana wasn't fired, but he basically was told, like, we need to move on. You want to move on. It was a divorce and kind of a messy one. But I think that is a little bit of a regret. Like, he won 8 games most of the years. He had a real bad 4-win season. The other bad was a 7-win year. He had the Orange Bowl title. Like, that was Big East still. West Virginia fans would take that era all over again for the current one. And I think maybe they didn't, he's a different personality. I will say. I think
it was probably time, just in terms.
Yeah,
of
it might have been rough time, like personality wise. I know a lot of the former players didn't even feel welcome there under Dana, and that's been public too. So that sucks. But like in terms of wins and losses, there are a lot of West Virginia fans during the Dana era that thought this isn't good enough. We got to win. We can't never win 10 games again. Like we got to be better than this. Not realizing at the time that was a pretty successful era for any program. Right. Like to average 7-8 wins a year for basically 10 years is especially not bad.
In this really competitive conference where everybody's about your peer. And so it's
right. Like that is not that bad.
I think
but I do want to flip the script here while I have you. In terms of Pitt, for example, because they're a little different than West Virginia. They were really bad for a while. Obviously, there's tons of history where they have all these NFL players and Hall of Famers, and way back in the day, they claim some titles that I don't think are legitimate. But now they are in a situation where they're coming off of an ACC crown only 2 years ago. As you mentioned, 20 wins in 2 years, like solid bowl game appearances, a major bowl game, winning last year. They are a really good program now, and Pat Narduzzi's going nowhere. The Pitt fans kind of go from wanting to fire him 2 years ago to now loving what he's selling. Recruiting-wise, they're churning players to the NFL. They're doing much better in the region. The Pitt program is thriving more now than it has probably for 10 plus, if not 20 years. And now the fan base is probably sitting there saying, going to the ACC, where the Big 12 hurt West Virginia, being in the ACC where it made sense regional-wise and we got to keep our rivalries, it has really helped us. And even the basketball program's doing well now. Capel got them back in the tournament after they were floundering. We like where we are. We don't want to realign and change all this up. And yeah, if West Virginia wants to come, that's great. But like, we don't want to be SMU where we're making phone calls and brokering deals. We're good. For you, though, are they good? Or do they need to have their eyes on, we might have to beg ourselves to get in the Big Ten, who didn't really want us before. We could actually get screwed despite our program thriving right now, because if the ACC dissolves, yeah, the Big 12 probably would take them, but like they don't want to be there. The fans don't want to be there either. They would be in the same boat West Virginia's in, which they admit isn't good for WVU. Maybe the Big Ten would take them, but like, could that actually be an example of a program really good on the field, stable athletic director, head coach wise, but could actually get screwed out of this? Or do you think Pitt's fine?
No, I mean, it's certainly a concern when you look at the good thing, I think, is that the ACC's contract is through 2036. I don't think that we're going to see an explosion until probably 2033, 2034. So you got another decade in you. So
you don't think like Florida State is going to,
I think Florida
State out of
there
earlier, because that's kind of what they're saying if you're reading tea leaves.
I do think Florida State could get out of there earlier, but I don't think that would blow up the whole thing, if that makes sense. So
I guess I'm assuming that if they get out, then Miami probably gets out.
And I don't think that people would necessarily follow.
Okay.
No, I think that Florida State is, one, desperate a little bit, and two, like they'd have to raise a lot of money, and I don't necessarily know that that's something that's actually going to be attractive to a Clemson, to a North Carolina, to a Miami. Now,
I do also think the ACC deal is, and I could be wrong here, isn't it where that if their conference number of teams drops to, I believe, 8 or lower, their payout to leave is way lower? Like Pitt could say if those 3 leave, now it's way less. Like we can voluntarily get out.
Yeah, so I think, though, that the situation that they'd be in is that they would need more than half of the teams to want to get rid of the conference. And I don't think that they're going to be in that position, because I don't think, again, maybe Clemson has a spot to go, maybe Florida State has a spot to go, maybe UNC has a spot to go, but there's a lot of teams that wouldn't have a guaranteed spot to go. And so I do think that if you're an athletic department right now and you're not looking forward at least a little bit, I think that you're doing yourself a disservice. I mean, obviously, one, I hope that the ACC continues to exist because I think it's a good league. But two, I mean,
it is, yeah.
But I think it's also, if you're Pitt, if you're Virginia Tech, if you're Virginia, like you do at least have to have options on the table, because I think that everybody has been in this situation now where they've been left here. And even the Pac-12 schools, I mean, the Four Corners group was having consistent conversations with the Big 12 just in case. And I think that that's why they were able to end up in as soft a landing spot as really anybody. And so
if I ask you another hypothetical, if your Pitt in the ACC is either not where you want to be anymore, like even if you don't have the 8 situation, but the 3 top dogs of marquee programs, Miami, Florida State, Clemson, and maybe even UNC, all 4 of them, certainly 3 of them, they leave in the next
Sure.
few years. And you're Pitt, they're saying, now you could argue that like West Virginia, oddly, they might then become the blue blood of the conference. Maybe they would say we want to stay and be the blue blood. But if you want to leave, are you better off in the Big 12 or the Big 10?
Well, I mean, if you can get your way into the Power 2, you have to. Like, you just have to.
Okay.
Just to secure your spot long term in college football. But what I will say,
assuming the SEC is out of play, like
sure,
I can't
sure,
imagine that would make sense.
no, I couldn't imagine that. So what I'd say is that if I were Pitt in that situation, and again, I don't think that there's any guarantee that the Big Ten would necessarily take them.
Right.
What I'd be trying to push for is I would want there to essentially be like that Eastern pod, right? I'd say not only will we come over, but we're going to bring Virginia Tech. Maybe we'll bring one of the North Carolina schools, and we kind of have like this regional thing, right? Where I think West Virginia, of course, would be thrilled about that. The opportunity.
I think they probably would support it.
And so I think that would probably be the pitch that they'd make. Now, look, the other part of this too that we do have to reckon with is the idea that, let's say in 2033, 2034, this all does happen. I mean, all of this could be up in the air, right? Like 4 schools could leave from the Big 12 to go somewhere else, and 3 schools may leave from the Big 10 to go somewhere else.
Yeah,
and
maybe West Virginia's not in the Big 12 anymore, right. And like they want to be in the ACC.
Yeah, maybe there is.
Like,
yeah, because I do think, for example, if there was some level of movement in the ACC, well, I think that makes it a lot more attractive for West Virginia to maybe be a candidate for the ACC down the road. But it's just, there are so many unknowns, obviously, when it comes to this stuff. But I do think that if in one way or another stuff in the ACC gets blown up, I think that, one, if I'm West Virginia, I'd want to try to push my way into whatever the new thing is. Okay. But 2, again, if you're Pitt, I think that, 1, you feel pretty good that there's going to be an opportunity for you in one of the remaining conferences. But 2, I would try to ally myself with other regional schools, because I think that long term, that is something that that will pay off.
Yeah, Shehan Jeyarajah here of CBS Sports. So last thing, and it's off the regional tip here, as I've had a lot of fun talking about this with you. And this actually was brought up again. We can just pull from the Arizona State media session that has now gone viral. I actually, honestly, from a WV perspective, think with a little bit too much was made out of that. I don't think they were trashing the area as much as they just don't like traveling east. Like They made fun of Syracuse 3 minutes earlier and nobody cares. But anyway, they were talking about maybe the need to have, it won't be a big of a deal that all this is happening if, number one, Brett Yormark has put this out there. Maybe conferences will just rebrand themselves, new logos. It won't be Big 12 anymore. We'll just call ourselves the Midwest Conference, Big 10, whatever. Like all that'll be new. So it won't like be as much of a mind F when you're saying Big 12 when you have, 16, 18, 24 teams, which all that probably should happen and would make some sense. SEC might be the only one that's fine. So that's one bucket. The other one was they talked about in all of the non-revenue sports, you now immediately go to divisions, and I could see it making sense there. And even in football, maybe you get there in the future, and that kind of would be off your discussion there of pods, and maybe that would then make more sense and be easier on a program like West Virginia. What I will say is my pushback, before I let you go and get your thoughts, 100% get it in all non-revenue sports. 100%. I think it has to happen in I think that's the only way to have non-revenue sports is to then have divisions in them. It's really the only way that would save non-revenue sports. So I think all the ADs, that would probably make sense and probably is going to happen in the next few years, even though divisions have kind of left sports in general right now in the college game. But in college football, I mean, number one, it'd be incredibly hypocritical because the best thing Big 12 did, they were forced to because the one true champion thing with the co-champs of Baylor in that TCU controversial year. But they have kind of been progressive in getting rid of divisions, and now the Big Ten's answering the bell and doing the same thing. And I could see an argument of if you have divisions, how then do you crown? Like you're in a situation where you may not crown the best teams, and you may not have who you want in those title games. You've had it in the ACC before; it's happened in other conferences where you could have the 4th or 5th best team, 3rd best in the championship game because they're winning a weak division. You could have like in the Big Ten, where Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan are all in the same freaking division, and Penn State is the 3rd best team in the conference. Ohio State is the 2nd best, but they're boxed out of the championship game that like just happened when you get Purdue there, who wasn't better than any of those top 3. Is that a problem for you, or are you a proponent of just now going back to where it was with all divisions because that kind of would fix the regional situation? that's going on, even in college football?
So I think that the way that I look at it, and I think this is the way that conferences are generally looking at it, is they're scheduling divisionally almost or geographically, but they're not doing the standings as divisions, right? So you have like some level of permanent rivals, some level of it's taken into account in scheduling that maybe every year, for example, the Texas schools will play each other because they have rivalries and they're close by. But whenever it is time to kind of pull it up and do the standings, they're still taking the top 2 from the conference as the teams in the title game. Now, the one thing that I'll say, and it's funny, right? I have loved the existing Big 12 setup where it was a round robin where the top 2 make it. I think that is by far the best of
right. They were forced into it. They didn't really do it because they wanted to initially, but yes, it's been the best.
I think it was incredible. I loved it. And I think you even see this year, Oklahoma's schedule is so much easier than West Virginia's, or so much easier than Kansas State's. And that's going to play, obviously, a significant role. So, for example, let's say hypothetically that West Virginia's pod was Cincinnati, was Kansas, was like, teams that aren't all that awesome right now.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, obviously that would give them an easier pathway. And obviously that's something that we'll have to reckon with at some point. But I do think that long-term, that's probably going to be the move, is a scheduling-based setup that takes into account geography, but an actual standings that still is the best of the rest.
Yeah, and you could just do straight divisions in every non-revenue sport if you want 100%. To, or do a similar format that you're talking about. And I also think that it would be fine even if you, maybe to make it easier for fans, group them into pods, which is probably a better word than divisions, and even have them there, and you could even see those standings, maybe print a t-shirt if they happen to win it, but you still take the top 2 teams. So like you could win a division, but it doesn't automatically put you into the conference title game.
Sure.
You need to be the top 2 teams in the conference, which maybe even goes to overall record if you can't just do it in conference, because it's impossible to play everybody when you're having this many teams. And that would go back into the strategy of, now you really need to worry about your overall schedule and how you schedule things, and would go back to kind of what Ren Baker wants to do, and it isn't there.
And one thing that I'll also say is, I think that 16 teams is a lot. I have no earthly idea how the Big Ten is going to figure out 18. That is a mess of a schedule. That is a mess of a conference. That's a mess of divisions. I mean, for them to try to take the top 2 of anything feels outrageous, right? The teams have 100% such different schedules, and so maybe
I even wonder how much longer. Maybe they do like this, but like if I'm Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, I would almost get together and be like, if you're doing divisions or pods, I get us playing each other because of regionality. We cannot all be in the same division. Like this is ridiculous. This is just not fair. The 3 programs that are basically controlling the conference are in the same bucket.
Right. No, they'll have to figure that out, and I think that, maybe that does push them, like you said, to go back to divisions in some sort of way. Maybe that does connect them in like, again, more NFL-ized style. Yeah. Maybe there's 16 divisions of 3. I don't know, but it's
you have, and I brought this up before, like maybe you do, if you really want to make it NFL, you do divisions.
Sure.
But like in the NFL, winning a division, even when it's a weaker division, the Buccaneers got in when they weren't that great, winning a division in the past, and had a home game over the Cowboys, etc. That'll happen even in the NFL format. But you win a division, it gets you into the Big Ten playoff, and then there's 2 more games just in the Big Ten conference, and then you have to win those to get into the Big Ten championship. And it would be hard to do that schedule-wise, because then you'd be playing everything almost into February, and you'd be really competing with the NFL. But if you really want to make it fair and do that, and it'd be more money. If you have super conferences, maybe they have to have playoffs within themselves to then get into the college football playoff, which also we didn't even get to, and I don't have time here, but that could be totally thrown into a whole nother catastrophe. And there's already rumors from people on the board that they might need to sit down and redo the whole thing of the future expansion, good or bad.
Yeah,
because
it will definitely at least be a conversation about how they structure it. I mean, personally, my hope is that they keep the 6-6. It seems quite unlikely that would happen. I do think that there's a pretty good chance that we just go to a 5-7, where it's the 4 existing power conferences and then one other as well. But there's also been conversation that they could drop it to 8, or that they could have 12 at larges. I personally think that would really be unfortunate.
Yeah.
But
I think a lot of this depends on what Notre Dame wants to do.
Sure.
Because if Notre Dame, and I don't think that I don't know how, if you're a conference selling me, you can get 100% of an NBC deal, or even if they go up to 75, like that's not 100. Like, unless you're giving me the whole share and then nobody else gets any money, why would I take away that deal? Or and I don't know how a conference would allow them to have the deal. So they would have to get rid of the deal, I'd imagine, because it could be different market wise with what the conference has. So if Notre Dame wants to stay an independent, I cannot envision a scenario where the playoff committee would want to, unless they want to push Notre Dame to a conference, have a non-wild card format where you have to be a conference champ. Like, they just take the conference champs.
That would not.
You then would push Notre Dame out. So they have to have a way where they have quote unquote wild cards, where it could be a group of 5 winner, could be the runners up in all these major conferences.
No, and it's too significant to. So for example, right, Texas and Oklahoma move over to the SEC. It was an integral part of that discussion that multiple SEC teams can get in every year, because. As at larges, because
as it's been happening, but
like, you can't be in a situation where let's just say that Georgia is what Georgia is for the next 10 years. You can't be in a situation where LSU and Oklahoma and Texas and Auburn and Alabama and all these other teams can't get into the playoff, right? Like, that's just not feasible. No. So whether it's 8 with the best 8 teams, because a lot of years are going to have 2 or 3 of those, whether it's 12 with 6 at-larges, because they're going to have 2 or 3 of the at-larges, they're comfortable with that. But I do think that, but again, I really hope that they don't lose that conference championship perspective and the value that comes with it, because ultimately, I just think that it is a great thing to re-incentivize conference championships.
Yeah, and it's money for the conferences, but that goes back to maybe you bring in more and how to have a playoff. If you have 3 major conferences and then you don't have the ACC in 10, 15 years, or even if you have 4 of them, you have a playoff within the conferences, have the conference title game, and then you have the college football playoff. That maybe could be a discussion, or maybe you expand to more. And maybe somehow all this will ever get us to an NCAA tournament style situation. Wouldn't that be insane? Because nobody at the top of college football ever wanted to do that in years past, and they do it in lower levels of the sport. But yeah, this is impossible to know. Everything we discuss on this show could be a moot point tomorrow when I post it, because this is all ever moving. But I definitely appreciate all the time, man. Again, I could talk to you all day on this. I do have a prediction. Put your prediction hat on, because I think this really depends on a lot what goes on that we just talked about. Do you think Notre Dame stays independent, or they get in a conference in the next 10, 15 years, like the next waves? Do you envision Notre Dame in a conference or staying independent? Because that domino and that decision could affect a lot of this.
I do think that Notre Dame stays independent. I don't think that any conference can offer them enough value to cost them their independence. I mean, one thing to remember, like, the College Football Playoff Board of Managers is the 10 conference commissioners and also the Notre Dame athletic director. They have an outsized influence on this sport. They exist in their own way.
Which shows you they want them in every now and then.
100%. And I think the other part of it too is that, look, the money matters. They make way less money from NBC than other conferences will heading forward. I do think that deal will be edited, but Notre Dame is still one of the richest athletic departments. They're not hurting for money. They just signed a $10 million per year contract with Under Armour, which is so much more than everybody else is getting for their apparel contracts. And so I think that they will only be pushed into a conference when they are forced. And I don't think that moment is going to come.
Yeah, I think the only way they're pushed in, which, as we're talking about, probably is never going to happen, because you have a guy on board of directors, and it just makes no sense from a branding or money standpoint, is if the playoff ever gets together and says, and there were rumors about this in terms of seeding, that either you can't get in unless you're in a major conference, even if you don't have to win it, but like the wild cards are even from the bucket, like you cannot be independent to get in, or you are such a disadvantage where you can't get a bye or something. Like, if those things go through,
that's how it exists right now.
Yeah, that's going through. Like, yeah, right. But
and Notre Dame, because Jack Swarbrick specifically said, look, this is how much we value independence. We're willing to give up the opportunity to ever get a bye in the playoffs. So
but that could change because that was made prior to this shake.
Yeah, and so we'll have to see, obviously, whether
you
that
can't
does
give
change.
Pac-12 champion a bye.
But they did all that to say they did agree to it, and so they do value their independence to that level, and they think that they still have the ability to compete.
Yeah, if you can do it, great, and they're probably the only program that could legitimately do it. Like, look at UConn. Like, they cannot thrive as an independent. Right. It's just not working out, regardless of any other sports. So
I think Ohio State could, but that's a whole other conversation for a different
They probably could, but I'd wonder if they would want to give up the bragging rights that winning.
No, they wouldn't. They would never do it, but I think they could.
Yeah, unless they're going to have a new AD, so we'll see the mentality of that new AD. But Shehan Jeyarajah from CBS Sports, I definitely really appreciate the time, and we'll talk again about some football.
Looking forward to it, man. Thank you for having me.
All right, man. Have a great day. All right, Shehan Jeyarajah from CBS Sports. And, man, we talked a lot longer than I thought we were going to, but I just couldn't stop the conversation. A lot of fun talking to him. It's been a while. Got to have him back on shows, and really that kid can dive into some history and really get inside. So he's in the area where you can get inside, and now a national writer with CBS Sports again. Talked to him back when he was with Dave Campbell football and covering Baylor and those teams. So definitely can go back into the Shehan Jeyarajah well, and I believe I pronounced his name correctly. I tried to practice a lot prior to this show, listening to others pronounce it and himself pronounce it. And let's just say I do believe I did a better job than Paul Feinbaum, for example, even though being on this show isn't the same as being on that one for him. So great conversation. I get it was long. I don't know what I can all edit out of that one. So I recommend watching and listening to as much as you can, but again, appreciate the time from Shehan Jeyarajah from CBS Sports. And as we talked about, a lot of this probably isn't as evergreen as we'd like it to be because the world of college sports is ever changing, is ever growing. As Neil Brown put it recently, it is a dog-eat-dog world. It is all about money. It is basically, kill or be killed in a way in terms of college sports now. So sitting back and relaxing didn't work for the Pac-12. It worked out for the Big 12 because they were proactive and they had Brett Yormark, who was a boss in those meetings. Still Big 10 and SEC as the top dogs. We'll see about the future of all these other programs. Notre Dame, again, I do agree they're fine the way they are, and I don't see them moving, even if they're willing to take a disadvantage, as long as they can get in. And that brand offers so much, even if they never win the national title. So a lot of moving parts. A lot of this is, as they say in the world of non-evergreen content, this is fluid. It's all fluid. I'm going to put that out there. This is all fluid. So when you listen, maybe it's fluid itself out of being as relevant, but nonetheless, this is all fluid as the world of conference realignment continues to either plague you or maybe intrigue you. We'll see. And maybe we get back to regionality with divisions anyway, although I don't think I want that. But maybe divisions with still the 1-2 playing for the conference title, or maybe playoffs within the conferences. That I could be sold on for sure. Again, Mic Drop is available throughout the Believe Network, also everywhere you get your podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn, I believe maybe. One of those, I think, actually is going away this month. So wherever you get your podcast is still around. Apple Podcasts, though, is where I prefer. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn, etc. You also find it throughout the Believe family of networks and their properties, and also on their site, and of course on the Sports Now family of networks when it fits. And this one, it freaking definitely does.